concept of the one all-powerful, all-knowing God in Islam, how is that different from the one in Judaism?
Okay, good question. So the concept of God in Islam, is it different, same compared to the concept in the Old Testament Judaism? I would say it is 90% the same, all right? Compared to the New Testament or Trinity, which is more different, in the Old Testament.
Jews.
Yeah, so I was just touching on that, so I'm coming back to it.
Okay.
You know, in the Quran, so let me just recite one passage of the Quran, then I will align that passage with something from the Old Testament, just to show how aligned it is, how much similar or same it is. So there is a passage in the Quran, chapter number 112. In Arabic, it goes like this. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad. Lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. That's a short passage from the Quran. The translation is this, Kathy. It goes like this. Say He is Allah, one and only. He is eternal, He is needed by all. He begets not, nor He is begotten, and there is none like unto Him. So this passage is saying that God is one, God is unique. He doesn't have children, He doesn't have parents. There is no one eternal like Him, and no one has the attributes the way that God has in their perfection. So how is it similar to the Old Testament oneness of God? Many different ways. Example. The first commandment of the 10 commandments, and this is in the book of Exodus, chapter number 20, verse number 3. The very first commandment is that you should not have any other God besides me. And Islam says 100% we agree with that. When Moses, peace be upon him, when he was sharing the oneness of God with his people, this is in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse number 4, in which he mentioned, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is only one. We say 100% we agree with that. Then we also say that when He came, right? So let me just align one passage from the New Testament also, right? So there's a passage in the New Testament from the lips of Jesus. A person came to Jesus, a Jewish person, and asked Him a $1 billion question, that of all the commandments of the Old Testament, which one is the first, the greatest of all of them? And this person was speaking about the 613 commandments in the Old Testament. And he wants to know of all the 613, which one is the first, the greatest of all of them. And Jesus, He replied to that person. Anyone knows his reply? No. Yes, Paul.
Love God with your whole heart, your whole soul, and your whole mind.
Yes, exactly. So it says in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, verse number 29, Jesus replied right away and He said, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is only one. Love Him with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and that is the first commandment. So we say 100% we agree with that, right? So what we don't agree with the Old Testament concept of God along with the Quranic concept is that the Old Testament, it says in the book of Exodus that after God created, also in Genesis, after God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, it says He did this on the 7th day.
Rested.
He rested, right? So the Quran says that no sleep, no slumber overtakes God. He doesn't need to rest. He doesn't need to get refreshed. God is always active, all-knowing, resting and getting tired. These are human attributes. One other place in the Old Testament, it says, after humanity was displeasing God and worshipping idols and moving away from monotheism, God regretted that He created humanity. But we say in Islam, the Quran says that God always knows the future and the present and the past. God knew that humanity, some segment, they are going to rebel. So the Old Testament gives a perception that God was not knowing when He regretted, when He was sorrowful, that humanity is rebelling. So besides these small variations, we say 90% of the monotheistic concept in the Old Testament, we Muslims agree with that. So with the coming of the Quran, Sally, what the Quran does is, Quran corrects some of the ways that the Old and the New Testament may have diluted the oneness or in the Old Testament especially, some of the major crimes are being also assigned to the prophets. Like some prophets, according to the Old Testament, they committed incest, nudity, idol worship, drinking, all of these. Quran, if you read the Quran, the stories of the prophets are there. However, Quran takes them as the role model for the people of that time. They were the best people. They were sinless. They have not done any of these, even smaller or the bigger sins. So that is kind of the similarities, Sally, and some differences between Old Testament and the Quran, and also somewhat in the New Testament. But the oneness, you're right. If you ask a Jewish person, a Jewish scholar, okay, what is your concept of God? He's going to say the Shema. That means there is only one God. He alone we should worship. In that, Muslims and the Jewish brothers and sisters, 100% aligned.
I had a question going back to education. And of course, in the news we have seen, is it, I believe, Pakistan that is not allowing the women to go to school?
Afghanistan.
Or Afghanistan.
Next country to Pakistan. Yes.
Okay.
Neighbors.
So
Neighbors.
are they followers of Islam and Muslim or not?
Okay, all right. So, so Carol is asking, there may be one country, maybe some countries, they may not be allowing the girls or maybe the women from gaining education. If Islam not only recommends, Islam obligates men and women to gain education, then how come some people may not be fulfilling that obligation, correct? So I would say that not every cultural practice is reflective of Islam. Because there may be so many dynamics which are in place in Afghanistan, different countries. So much wars were going on for decades. They don't have the infrastructure and whatnot. But at the end of the day, Islam is here, Islam is perfect. Cultures, humans, us, we are imperfect. Just because we are doing something over here does not mean that's exactly what the Quran and Islam says. In the same way, sometimes I also say this, that like in the New Testament, Christian ladies are supposed to wear the hijab, but how many of you wear it when you go to church? When I drove over here, the speed limit was 30, 35, I forgot, right? How many of us, we drive obeying the speed limit, we know what is wrong, right? We don't, correct? Okay, one more example. According to the Constitution, according to the policy, males and females in this country, we are supposed to have equal pay for equal work. You know where I'm going from this, right? Yeah. What is the reality on the ground? If I say, me living in India, for example, I can point out and say, come on, why are the women over here oppressed? They don't get equal pay for equal work. Come on, what's going on? Is it the Constitution or is it the workplace ethics and environment? In the same way, if we hear anything from especially the Muslim countries, extremism and war and bombing and suicide and lack of education, it's important for us to separate the culture and the dynamics and the geopolitics compared to the perfect teachings and the guidance that God has given to humanity.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer.
Yeah.